Autumn came with a mood like a held breath, and men learned to go about their business quieter for fear of making it catch. The ravens arrived anyway, shameless, black punctuation on the gray air. They brought grief like coins and gossip like small beer. The ones from the Dreadfort never came at all. John had Lewin note that down where absences went. He drew lines across thick vellum until the north was a skin stitched shut by roads and rivers. He pinned men to those lines by name and beam and appetite. He made a habit of going out himself to look at the places quills drew. He would take 5 men or 10 and ride until the maps were wrong and then linger until the maps were right again, and when he came back he would wash the road off at the well and write in a clean hand. Here is how the wind goes in the bar Rollins. Here is where the ford swallows men who think they know what water does. The river at the White Knife's mouth skinned over and unskinned itself like a sly animal for weeks before deciding to hold ice. White Harbor grew a rim of frost around the quays and a rim of rumor around its lord. Wyman Manderley sent flour with one hand and questions with the other. He had lost a son and gained a list of enemies, and one of those lists pleased him more than it should. A raven from Bear Island brought a scrap of pelt and words burned into it with a hot nail. We hunt whales and whites. Send steel. A raven from Barrowton came with a courteous string of small complaints that Roderick marked only in part and answered in full. A raven from Deepwood Mott did not come at all. It was a long time before anyone saw that as a message. Theon handed John a letter one evening as the hall settled into its small noises, and the cook's onion soup made men complain as if complaining fed them better. He had the look he wore when he had a jest he was not certain anyone should hear. From the stony shore, he said. A seal on it I once ate for supper. John slid it with his thumb and read the careful script a second time before letting his eyes move. Balan Greyjoy did not waste ink on subtlety. The islands were kings again. The North's long, hungry coastline would belong to men who had learned to drink brine instead of milk. The Queen, he said, was a lion who had mistaken the sea for a river. The Starks were wolves who had mistaken the same. He invited the wolf in his hall to come home and wear salt where snow had lived. Theon's grin went a fraction sharper and then off his face entirely. He wastes no time, he said, too lightly. He never did. Do you owe him anything? John asked. Theon made a face and ran a hand through his hair, too aware suddenly of the hall behind him. A father is a thing a boy owes even when the boy becomes a man and learns his father was only one sort of man. If you want to know whether I will go to him on a rope of his own words, the answer is no. You could, John said without softness. You could go to him and be the prodigal with a knife behind your back and a list of our gates under your tongue. Theon laughed and then swallowed it. If you want me to leave, say leave, he said. Do not sharpen it. He sent for me to make me his bad son publicly. He would cut my name into the pine and anchor it there to rot. He has Asha and he has ships. He does not need me. He needs me to kneel. I need you not to, John said. Men do not come here easily twice. If you leave, you will be the king's son on a deck and a stranger in every hall you set foot in. If you stay, you will be the man who did not let his blood make him stupid. Theon flicked the letter with 2 fingers. He will send Asha to see if I can be smoked out by mockery. Let her come, John said. We will teach her that the stony shore learns a new name in winter. They did not have to wait. The coast began to burn one village at a time, the way dry grass does when a man who loves fire walks through it whistling. Deepwood Mott's raven mast went black against the sky and then fell. Glover men came straggling to Winterfell with salt on their mouths and a habit of looking over their shoulders. They told stories of a woman who laughed on a gray horse and did not miss with a knife in either hand. They told stories of men from Pike who moved like a tide up a beach and left the same wreckage. They told stories of boys who ran out of houses only to run back when they saw their mothers lying like split sacks across the threshold. John's mouth went tight. We cannot spread our men around the coast like butter and call it bread, he said to Roderick. They will eat one village at a time and call it victory. They will come inland when they can, Roderick said, mustaches bristling with indignation at the thought of it. That is where we kill them. Send to White Harbor. Manderley has oars enough. Manderley had oars enough and opinions more than enough. "I will send ships," his letter said. "I will not sail them into stupid water." He sent 3 galleys with men who could tie knots blind, and he sent a captain too fat for his boat and too clever for the men trying to drown him. They forced the raiders inshore against a weather that had sided with the north for once. Asha Greyjoy came up the flint cliffs with 30 men and went down again with 10. She laughed as she did it, the men said. She laughed when one of her knives broke. The second knife did not. Theon rode out to the stony shore with the Hornwood men and returned with news that his father had sent him in ink only. "She fights like a man who has stopped listening to the men around her," he said without mockery. "If she were not my sister, I would love her. If she were not my sister, I might kiss her. If she were a man, I would kill her and feel worse about it." "She is your sister," Jon said. "You will kill her if she gives you no choice. You will not love her. You will not kiss her. You will not die of the confusion. You will eat bread and ride again tomorrow." Theon made a face that said, "You are a Stark," and then said, "I." One night by the grease light in the solar, while the winds tried the shutters with 2 hands, Luwin pushed a strand of hair back under his chain and said, "Send to the Umbers and the Mormonts both. Send a message that does not say what you mean. Ask for tar and pitch for the walls. Ask for the worst furs they have. Men like to be asked for things that do not flatter them. It makes them feel necessary." "What do I mean that I cannot say?" Jon asked. Luwin tapped the raven stick he used as if it might make its answer rattle out. "You mean to gather men who know how raiders think. Umber men because the seas taught them first. Mormont men because their island taught them second. You mean to teach them to think together. There is no insult in asking for bad furs. A man who will part with a shabby fur will part with a knight on a horse without thinking." Jon smiled without softness. "I am learning that soups and small lies win wars as often as swords." "Soups more than lies," Luwin said mildly. "But I am a maester. We think all things are soup." Theon came to Jon's door in the second hour with hair damp and a look on his face that had not learned how to sit there yet. "A rider from Barrowton," he said. "Roose Bolton has sent no answer to any letter because he has given all his words to a raven that died in a storm. This is from Lady Dustin." Jon took the sheet and read it with the little patience he had spare in a winter like this. Barbary Dustin wrote like a woman with a sword in her lap and a long habit of expecting to be called a liar. The phrase had sent men north with smiles like knives. Roose had put new men in old halls. Men had begun to go missing the way spoons did. She had seen a letter from the south with a pretty seal and a promise that had been used to kill a Stark already once in a different color of ink. She suggested, in a handsome curl of a line, that if Jon meant to look for wolves in men's cloaks, he should keep his own close, and not let any fry come within the warmth of Winterfell who could be left out where snow made things true. Bolton did not answer because he did not mean to, Theon said. He will be answering other letters. He will be asking the Lannisters to make him Warden of the North the way a man asks a whore for a favor with one hand counting his own money in his pocket. He'll get it, and we'll get songs about it that taste of old vinegar. Let him write his letters, Jon said. We will write men. Men are slower but more useful. He sent Jory to the Rills and to Oldcastle. He sent Hallis Malin to Last Hearth and to Deepwood now that Deepwood had smoke again. He sent Theon back to the stony shore with too few men and a look that said, Go do the thing that is hard and come back with less of you and more of the North. He kept Roose Bolton's silence on the table and fed it scraps of his attention as one feeds a stray dog with a bad eye, enough to make it not bite you now, not enough to make it bold. In the second fortnight after the first thaw that was only a liar, a horn sounded on the east wall that no man had heard in 3 generations. It was not a horn of war. It was a horn of a different sort, a sound like cold iron being struck by a hand that no longer had blood in it. Men stopped what they were doing. Men tightened fingers around ladles and around hammer hafts as if those could answer. Luwin crossed the courtyard awkwardly, nearly losing his cap to the gusts. His chain clinking in the note a maester's chain makes when it wants to warn without words. From the wall, he said, breath smoking. 3 blasts. I did not dare believe my own notes the first time. 3 blasts. Ghost came to stand with his flank pressed lightly against John's knee. The white of him made the snow look dirty. 3 blasts meant others in old stories. In old stories, the dead had to be invited into houses. In new stories, they found their own way in and then learned where the bread was kept. What else? John asked. Fire at Eastwatch by the sea, Llewyn said. And a seal I do not know. The hand that wrote it is neat and straight, like a man who judges himself every day and mostly acquits. The letter was short. Stannis Baratheon had taken his fleet north under a sky so low it made men stoop. He had learned to light pitch on water. He had learned to bend his pride to the shape of a beggar's bowl long enough to feed his men on salted cod. He had learned to ask for help with a mouth that did not like the word. Men at Eastwatch did not use courts. They used fires and tried truths in them. The letter said, I am at the wall. Come with your banners if you have any love for the realm your father served. Or send bread. I will take bread. It is a king's right to accept bread. John found himself laughing, a small hard sound. The laugh felt like pulling a splinter out clean. He saves us from choosing, he said. He tells us what to do and calls it our own idea. Roderick studied the letter, then John's face. You mean to go? To the wall, John said. Not because he is a king, because the wall is where men become simple again. I will leave enough here to watch Bolton and to keep the phrase from freezing to the stones outside the gate and calling it our hospitality. I will take men who have never seen the sea and teach them to fear it for the right reasons. Reasons, Roderick snorted. It moves, John said. Men are steadier. They left Winterfell under a sky that made men squint. It had forgotten it could be blue. John took 100 men because 100 men can slip where 1,000 leave tracks. He left the Great Hall to Roderick and to Llewyn and to Catelyn, who had decided the North needed a lady even if the lady was a woman Winter had sharpened to a spear. She kissed John's brow when he took up his reins, and it felt like a benediction sharpened on both edges. If you see Arya, hit her with your hand and then hold her with both of them, she said. If you see Sansa, teach her to lie better or do not let her speak at all. If you see Robb, there are no words I can give you that will do anything. I will keep the rest for you, John said, and she nodded once as if that was a bargain men had struck before in hall and field. They rode east then north, and as the trees thinned the air tasted of old knives. Ghost ranged ahead and back, leaving a pale memory in the brush. The men who went had come up in Winterfell's halls, eating onion soup and watching their lord write letters with ink he counted. They were not born to ride into wind that ate thought. They did not complain. They made their faces into masks men could wear long enough to become truthful. They saw the wall 3 days before they reached it because the wall is a thing that begins before you arrive. The closer they came, the more it found parts of them to speak to. It found their pride and told it small stories. It found their shame and arranged it on a shelf. It found their hunger and denied all of it. The wall is honest in one way. It does not pretend to be anything but what it is. Some things that men make end up telling men the truth about themselves. Most do not. The wall does. Men in black waited on the bridge with faces like slate and oil on their beards to keep the cold from cracking their mouths. Their leader was a bear of a man whose wrinkles had wrinkles. He looked at John the way one tree looks at another. No envy, no awe, only acknowledgement. Stark, he said, and it was both greeting and accusation. Mormont, John said. Baratheon. The Lord Commander's mouth twitched. He said. Him too. He arrived like a storm that decided to wear a crown. He brought men who think cold is an insult, and the cold has been trying to answer them. The wildlings are more than there are stories for. I have had to learn to see a man with an antler hat and a wife with a spear and a baby in a sling as a person and a problem both. Give me the people, John said. Keep the problems. Mormont snorted in a way that might have been a laugh. If I could make that trade, I would have been a lord in the south. He led John to the king. Stannis Baratheon stood under a sky that did not care whether he stood or not. He stood anyway, which is what made men raise their eyes when he came into halls too. He had a brow like a cliff's edge and a mouth that did not do as many tricks as other men's. He had lost weight and found something else. He wore no ornament because his certainty was ornament enough. When he looked at John, he looked as if someone had placed a puzzle in his hands that did not insult him. "You are the boy who is not a boy," Stannis said. "You are the man who is your father's son and not your father's law. I wrote to you because you appeared to be both useful and not an idiot." "I wrote to you because the wall is real," John said, "and because men who sit in chairs kill one another when they cannot kill anything else, and I cannot stop them from doing it." "Are you a poet?" Stannis asked dryly. "I do not like poets. They distract honest men. I can barely write a letter that says the right thing at the right time," John said. "I am a Stark." "Good," Stannis said. "We will talk like men who learned their letters from maesters who disapproved of them." He gestured in a way that was almost a courtesy. "Walk with me. Pretend we have time for something so stupid as walking." They went out along the top of the wall where the wind pretends to be true and then changes the rules every step. The Night's Watch had built a way for wheels there in a year no one remembered. It had drifted over like everything else. Below, ice did what mountains do when they are patient. Nothing obvious and a great deal of the important things. "You will support my claim," Stannis said like a man saying. "This fire will light this room. If you hold this wall and the lands south of it for men who cannot afford to be your subjects," John said. "I will support your fight with the Lannisters and their pets." "Not the same thing," Stannis said. "Not different enough," John said. "You do not need my love. You need my food and my road, and for me to say in front of men who lightly betray that a man stood where he said he would stand." Stannis's mouth did the smallest thing. It might have been the ghost of a smile or the corpse of one. "You are a politician," he said in a tone that made the word ugly and then a little less so. "Unfortunate. You are the sort I like least. Honest and stubborn. I cannot move you except by moving the ground under you." "You can," John said. "I am moved by bread and by fire. And by law," Stannis asked with open mockery. "Your father was moved by it, and it killed him. He held it like iron and discovered it was glass." "I am moved by vows," John said. "Men who swear to keep watch and then keep it get more of me than men who ask the realm to be grateful." "You will support me," Stannis said. "And in return I will recognize you as Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, and everything your little wolf heart wants. And I will write it in letters taller than the wall if that will persuade your lords to stop thinking about wolves' heads and start thinking about bread. I will name Bolton a traitor when it suits me and a servant when it suits me less. I will break him if I can, and if I cannot I will make him a tool and then throw him away. You will not pretend to be a king. There are too many of us." "I will not pretend to be a king," John said. "The North will have a king again if it lives through this and needs one. It will not be me that puts the crown on himself." "Wise," Stannis said. "I must learn to stop hating wise men. They make me feel poor." He told John then what he meant to do, which is also how Stannis paid compliments, in deeds he allowed you to imagine yourself part of. He meant to break Mance at the wall and then use Mance to break men who believed they could not be broken. He meant to send Davos to men who would not put their trust in a lightning god or in a man who burned ships because they did not sail when he told them to. He meant to gather Karstark men who had made a long mistake and make them pay for it by holding lines that would kill them as honorably as they deserved. He meant to take Deepwood from the Ironborn and then the Dreadfort from the Flayers and then the hearts of men from their bellies. He meant to do too much and to try anyway. "You want my men," John said. "I want your name," Stannis said without shame. "Men will come if they think you are the host that asked them, not I. Men are ugly that way. They will come if they think we are not dying for a crown a boy wears to keep the wind off his ears," John said. "Even uglier," Stannis allowed. "We will write a letter together with words neither of us like and both of us will sign it. Then we will see whether your North can remember what it is for one more winter." Mance came to parley the next day with a woman at his shoulder whose eyes had the same hard light as the lake under early ice and a giant who did not understand why men made ladders when one hand sufficed. The king beyond the wall looked like a man who had almost learned to shave and then decided he did not care to go on learning. He played a harp well enough to make hard men turn their heads like boys at a birdsong. He smiled like a man who remembered 3 good jokes and was thinking of which one to tell. "We are many," he said to John bluntly. "You are few." "We have a wall," John said. Mance said, and there was something like respect in his voice and something like pity. "Walls are good until they are stairs." "The wall can be both," John said. "I will take your people south if they do not bring knives into my barns. If they do, I will cut their hands off. If you come with a spear because you like the look of snow going red, I will show you the other side of the wall again, and you will see if you like that better." "I like neither," Mance said. "I like no walls at all." "Then you like things that do not exist," John said. "You will choose the closest that does." They came because men like Mance measure poems by how many mouths can be fed out of them. They came in knots and lines and desperate little bundles and in packs that had made their own law and didn't like trading it for another man's. The wall swallowed thousands and learned their names and then forgot them. Old men of the watch grumbled and then learned to teach slow. Children learned to salt meat and then learned to smile sometimes again. The battle everyone had expected happened anyway because men are not the only thing that choose. Came at night with a wind that made teeth ache. It came with fires on the ground like the long tail of a falling star. It came with horns and with men in furs and with giants who used trees like men use hammers. John stood where the watch stood and used his torch the way a man uses the last tool left on a table. His blade sang when it hit the things that did not like to be called men anymore. Ghost came and went like the idea of mercy. Stannis took a piece of it. He took the timing and the pride. He fell upon Mance's rear the way a tide falls on a rock that has stood forever and learns that forever is only a word. The fighting lasted a day and then a life and then ended suddenly, as such things sometimes do when one side remembers it can run. When it was done, men counted themselves and went quiet in the places where the counts did not add up. Mance knelt. He knelt because a sword was at his throat, and because there were children crying where they should have been playing, and because he had learned to tell the difference between glory and luck around the time his first child was born. He knelt and did not pretend it pleased him. Stannis nodded as if he had solved a small equation. "Now the north," Stannis said to Jon as he wiped his sword on a dead man's cloak. "Now the men who think their names are swords. The men in the south think their names are crowns," Jon said, breathing hard. "It ends the same way if we let it." "We will not let it," Stannis said curtly. "We will take Deepwood, you and I, and we will make a gate on the stony shore that opens only toward us, and then we will make the Dreadfort remember what dread is in another man's mouth." They rode west under skies that had learned a new sort of gray in the meanwhile. Mormont gave Stannis men he did not have and thanked him for taking them. Mance gave Stannis a worry to carry like a stone in his pocket by not being a fool and by saying things in a quiet voice that sounded sensible. "If you kill men for doing what men do when they are cold," he told Jon without malice, "you will run out of men before you run out of cold. If you do not, you will run out of bread first. Choose which to be short of." "I know," Jon said. "I am tired of choices that make men admire me less after." "Stop admiring yourself first," Mance said, not unkindly. "It makes other men want to put you in songs you do not deserve." Deepwood Mott had 1,000 trees for a wall and 1,000 Ironborn for a reason to wish the trees taller. Stannis came out of the woods in a wedge that made men move because wedges ask fewer questions. Jon brought Mormont men with poles and hooks and taught them to take the palisade the way a man takes apart a cart. Peg by peg, with curses and sweat and one eye for the wheel ready to roll. The fight ended in the muddy yard with a woman who laughed when Jon threw her knife back to her and laughed when Stannis told her to kneel and laughed when she spat in the snow and the spittle froze in midair. "Take my knee, king," Asha Greyjoy said, and for a second something like triumph touched Stannis's eyes. "I'll give it to you. The sea does not listen to the wall and the wall does not listen to the sea. But this is a tree and my men are dead, and I like staying warm when I can. My uncle will not kneel. My father will die on a wet rock to prove he can. My brother will get himself killed to prove he cannot. I will live." "Your knee is useful," Stannis said. And you are insolent in a way only people who know how to be useful without being liked can be. I will take the knee." He glanced at John. "Shall I give her to you to keep as a friend you will hate?" "She would bite," John said. "And I would bleed and then like her." "Quite," Stannis said. "We will avoid that." He left Asha under guard with the understanding that any guard who turned his back would be cutting his own throat and calling it a shave. He marched with John east toward the heart of uglier work. Letters rode with them. Wyman Manderley wrote that he had lodged 6 Freys for a fortnight and had discovered that they took up 8 men's space, and he wondered whether it might make them thinner to appear at his table with half the portions normal men ate. Lord Serwyn wrote that the Freys had come with talk of friendship and mouths that did not know how to close. Lord Ryswell wrote nothing and sent a horse with a bite out of its ear. That meant a Karstark had ridden past and somebody had tugged too hard at its bridle at the wrong time. Or it meant a wolf had taught a lesson. John was not a man for omens. He noted it down and told himself to ask later. Winterfell, in his absence, held. Catelyn wrote rarely and with economy, as if words had become salt. "The boy wakes and sleeps," she wrote once of Bran. "He talks of trees. He has your patience, which is to say, not enough and too much in the wrong places." Rickon learned to watch a hall the way bad dogs watch a hand. John would teach him later, if later existed, to watch like a good dog instead. Sansa was a word in a castle where words listen at doors. Arya was a wind. They were crossing the Wolf's Wood when a small hawk came down as if the string holding it from the sky had been cut. The hawker was a boy with one ear and a scar that said he had once been bad at running. He knelt and held the cylinder up as if it contained fire and his own history. Stannis took it. His mouth thinned as he read. When he gave it to John, the page smelled faintly of lemon and smoke. Roose Bolton had been named Warden of the North by the boy who named himself king in the City of Knives. The Freys had become useful princes and had learned to coat murder in pastry and serve it with music. The crown declared the bread broken and the oaths remade and the past shapely. Told men to forget. Bolton was marching home with Lannister gold and Lannister words and a bastard with a smile like a slit throat. Stannis touched the hilt of his sword as a man scratches an itch he will not admit to. "If I were the sort to take counsel from men who drink sweet wines," he said, "I would ride for the Dreadfort now, meet him in his hall, and prove to him that a title is only a sound." "Are you that sort, Stark?" "I am the sort to count kitchens first," John said, jaw tight. "Wyman Manderley will let the Freys sleep and then make the hall shrink around them without moving a stone. Hornwood will pretend to be less than she is and be more than she claims. Ryswell will do nothing loudly and say later that he thought it best. Karstark will wait to see which side burns, then claim he knew those men as boys and their fathers were fools. Bolton moves like water in a ditch. If you walk into him in his house, he rises to your throat. If you dig a channel, he will go where you want." "Dig," Stannis said, a grim approval in it. "I will be the spade." They wrote the letter together, Stannis and Stark, to White Harbor and to Barrowton and to every place a man could feasibly sit a table full of meat without asking another man's leave. It said, "Stannis Baratheon will hold the wall and the King's Road and the Neck with Jon Stark at his side, and he will make any man who brings Lannister words into the north eat them with the wax still on." It said, "Manderley understands debt and will have his chance to pay it in coin men respect. Blood, if necessary. Bread, surely." It said, "The North belongs to the men who keep its poor alive in winter. If you are the sort of man who likes to call that theft, prepare to be poorer." It went out with men who knew how to keep papers dry and mouths shut. They cut across the snow like small black stitches in a white cloth. While the letters walked the world, men marched upon orders those letters had not yet written. The river called Weeping Water lived up to its name. Stannis learned how ice can hold a man and then spit him without warning. He cursed like a priest learning to dance. Jon saved him from the worst mud not because he loved him but because he did not want to have to love a different king with worse manners. They made camp within a day's ride of the Dreadfort and watched the sky for signs. Signs came on sturdy legs. Rill's men with their winter eyes, Ryswell's with their best horses, a handful of Umbers who could not bear to be left out of a fight that had a proper shape to it. They came because the letter had been worded carefully and because men like to do the right thing when it looks like a job and not like a poem. No Bolton men came. That told its own tale. Stannis sent Davos to White Harbor, a small gray man in a big cold world, with an offer in his glove that was not a ring. Davos laughed when he read it aloud in the hall at Winterfell before taking the South Road, and he looked at Jon with a warm eye and said, "He means it. He will give the fishmonger his fishes, and when the fishes are eaten he will act as if he did the world a favor." Jon found that he liked the man not because he was clever but because his cleverness served an honest thing. He sent him north and wrote a second letter behind him asking Wyman to hang 3 more lamps in his best hall and count whose shadows were short and whose were long. Bolton moved. He moved not at the Dreadfort but at Moat Cailin, because the moat is a thought every man passes through whether he knows it or not. In stories, Ironborn left their skulls on its stones. In new stories, men who guessed other men's appetites better than those men did lived to tell jokes about it. Ramsay Snow left gifts along the road. Fingers and dirty ribbons and a man without a nose. He left hounds that were less hungry than their owner. He left letters that read as if the paper itself had a cold. The Ironborn at the moat spoke to Theon in a language he knew better than he wanted to. The words were the same. Pride, belly door. The choices were 2. Theon went to Jon before dawn, mouth bloodless, letter crushed. "He knows my name the way I do," he said. "He offers me a seat and a chain and a hood that he will use to teach me to fetch. He says if I bring him the moat he will let me keep my nose and send my sister back with both her hands. He says if I do not, he will teach me to howl." "What do you want?" Jon asked. It was cruel and it was necessary. Ghost lifted his head and looked at Theon with a disinterest that was almost gentleness. "I want to be the man who did not run," Theon said honestly, and the honesty startled them both. "I want to be the man who did not betray twice. I want to be a man my sister would not laugh at. I want to be a man my father did not deserve. I want to sit by a fire and drink ale without tasting my mistakes in it." "You can do none of those things," Jon said softly, and Theon flinched as if from a blow. "You can only do the next thing without making a new ruin. I will give you 24 men. You will go to the moat and you will put Ironborn and Northmen on the same side of the stones. You will promise them bread and breath instead of glory. You will tell them there is nothing to be proud of in dying for a man who writes his kindnesses on men's skins. You will get them out alive if you can. You will not write a letter." Theon breathed out. "He will call me coward," he said. "He will say my blood turned out to be gray mud after all." "Let him," Jon said. "He tells more about himself than about you." Theon went with the men and came back with fewer than he had taken and more than anyone had believed he would save. The Ironborn spat when they came in sight of Winterfell because habit is harder to cure than hunger, but some of them cried sitting on the steps because their bodies had forgotten what warmth did to bone. "He swore he would flay me," Theon said in a voice that shook as if it were new. "He probably will. Not today." "Not today," Jon agreed, and he did not clasp Theon's shoulder, because sometimes mercy is leaving a man's skin alone. The Boltons came out at last like plague under a scab. Too soon and too late at once. Roose rode with men who had learned to keep pace with him. Ramsay bounced where his father slid, a dog to a ghost. Freys rode among them with the look of men who had wandered accidentally into a bear's den and decided to roar anyway. White Harbor men did not roar. They watched. Barrow men counted. Ryswells groomed their horses and smiled small. They met near the weeping water because the land remembered blood there and liked to be a place that stank of iron. Snow made the earth treacherous unless you knew where it sprang and where it sagged. Jon had walked it the day before with Hallis and 2 gray-beard men who could smell soft ground through the leather of their boots. Stannis put his heavy infantry where heavy infantry turn battles. He put himself where he could be seen most easily and heard least easily. Jon put Umbrai at the low ground with orders to shout when the Freys obliged them with a charge and to pretend to break like ice on a millpond. The Umbers did as they were told with laughter, and a great deal of dishonor men would tell stories about later that made them into heroes. Bolton's line crept like a dangerous fog. The phrase found the center, as men who do not know where they are always do. Roos did not move more than he needed to. He watched the way oil watches water. Ramsay took the left with men who did not know whether they were spears or dogs and so were bad at being both. He tried to bite through Manderley's right. Wyman Manderley laughed and made the line heavier by having men who should have been in the rear step forward while their bellies led them. It worked obscenely well. Sometimes fat is armor. John watched for the moment when everything was going to go wrong because that is what the men who survive battles do. They wait for the wrongness. When it came in a place he had hoped for. The small rise by the alder that looked like any other small rise by any other tree. He had put Riswells there with the serious look of men. He told they were doing something important even if he could not tell them what. They held when the phrase came like bread soaked in soup. They bent when Bolton men tried to thread between them. They did not break because John had told them very softly the day before that if they broke, he would set their horses free and tell everyone their horses had run from better men. Stannis drove at Roos then with a force that was very nearly joyless. John came up with the Mormont men at the hinge and broke Ramsay's men like pottery by hitting them exactly where the glaze had not taken. It lasted an hour and then years, and then it ended because Freys began to look at their hands and wonder whose skin was on them. It ended because men like Roos know when a number has moved down a place. It ended because Stannis enjoyed a problem solved more than he enjoyed a man killed, and this was a problem solved. They took Roos alive because he had brought too much paper with him on campaign, and men like that always hope their papers will save them. He looked at John with pale eyes that never told you what room they were in. "I came for order," he said without a tremor in his neck. "You came for a castle," John said. "You brought men who do not wash the blood off their tools when they go to sleep. It is stupid. The blood stiffens the leather." Roos did not smile. "You will kill me and call it justice." "I will kill you and call it the end of a conversation," John said. They put him down quick and quiet. Ramsay fled with dogs between his legs and men between him and shame. He would make a different winter for some other hall if they let him. John told himself he would not let him. That sort of promise keeps a man's back upright when there's no bread left. The phrase died hard where they could not wriggle free. The ones who did wriggle learned that White Harbor is a net that does not much care if the fish like being caught. Wyman made a feast to celebrate the winter not eating the north entirely. He did not use pastry for anything but pastry. He asked John to sit near the high seat and to bless the salt as if he were a septon. John did it, because bread and salt, their country's old magic against new betrayals. Davos arrived sober and grinning like a man who got to light the last candle in a long room. He leaned across the table later with his little onions on his cloak and said, "Wyman makes a good pie with no phrase in it. It's disappointing in a way. I am tired of clever food," John said. "I want boiled meat and a day where the raven brings emptiness." "You don't," Davos said cheerfully. "Men like you never do. You want to be needed. When men like you get old, you have to teach yourselves how to be useless or you go badly. Watch that." John liked him, which would have worried him if he had had the spare worry. They took the Dreadfort after. It took less blood than most men predicted and less mercy than John would have liked. The dogs had left and the cages were full of stupid hope. They burned the worst rooms clean and opened the rest to weather. Ramsay's writing tasted of bad meat on the tongue. John did not keep any of it. He kept one thing. A small wooden wolf child had carved bite marks along its haunch where a boy had learned that teeth are tools too. He gave it to Rickon and did not tell him where it came from. Rickon bit it thoughtfully and then tucked it under his palate, satisfied. Stannis stayed at Winterfell a week and found that winter makes kings into men. He accepted onion soup and found it less insulting after the third night. He listened to Catelyn without arguing, a discipline that caused the men around him to look at him with new respect. He watched Bran and did not ask the kind of questions men who want to keep the world small ask. He stood in the God's Wood with Jon under the bleeding leaves and said, "You will stand for me in the south when I need it." "I will stand for the wall," Jon said. "If you are the man standing there, then you can have my name on your paper." Stannis made that small not smile again. "I can work with that," he said dryly. It is not enough, and it will have to be. He went with Davos and with Manderley men who had made their peace with the idea that a southern king might be useful as long as they kept his appetite small. He left Jon something he had not expected: an understanding. It is almost as useful as an army when winter is at the door. Winter did not leave when kings did. It sat down in the yard and refused to move. The wall sent ravens with words like splinters. Cold, deep, empty, blue. Mormont's hand grew tighter and his letters shorter. Samwell Tarly's hand appeared once between the hard lines like a bird's wing in a storm, writing a paragraph about the library as if he hoped love of parchment could melt anything. Jon sent dragonglass from Dragonstone that Davos arranged the way men arrange for their children to be christened, with care and impatience. He sent wool and wood and whiskey and a boy from the Glover lands who could sharpen an edge on a river rock faster than a man could explain why that was not the right rock. He sent a promise he could not keep if the river froze early. Arya's ring bought her 3 beds and 2 knives and 1 safe passage. It bought her a seat in a hold where a Manderley captain looked at the sign and decided to pretend not to see. She went to Bravos and learned the way the water there keeps secrets better than men do. She did not send letters. Jon did not ask for them. He kept the ring's twin in a little box. He opened it sometimes to remember that the North had an eye in the East and that I was a girl who had refused to be closed. Sansa learned to braid her hair a new way to make men underestimate her in a different direction. She learned to speak to women in the Vale as if gossip were the only language there, because sometimes it is. She learned to take a hand when it was offered and to wonder whether the hand knew the difference between leading and owning. She learned to get good at shadows. She did not send letters either, but once there came a robin feather empty of eyes tied with a bit of blue ribbon the color of a dress she had loved. Jon tucked it into the same box. Bran spoke more often about wings. He had learned to close his eyes while sitting up and to do something else behind them. He began to tell Jon things like, "Do not hang the meat in the small room, it will fall. There is a leak there that will not show itself in the morning." He began to be right often enough that men started to prepare the meat in the next room without asking. Jon did not know what to call it and so did not call it anything. He listened when Bran asked for ravens and then came back with his eyes full of far country. In a winter like that, vengeance lost its taste and became a kind of bread after all. Simple and useful, full of nothing but what men needed to keep going. The phrase grew fewer. Some of it was Stannis with his law carved thin as bone. Some of it was Manderley with his invention that turned accidents into lessons. Some of it was winter taking men who insisted they were summer. The ones who survived learned to take off their boots at doorways and to wash their hands before eating and to say please. They did not like it, but they liked living, and winter has always been a good teacher. Ghost grew white enough to be mistaken for a flurry until he moved, and then men remembered he was a story. He slept by the door when Jon's burdens wanted to leave him, and he would not let them. He went where boys wanted to go and made their mothers forgive it later. He lay at Bran's bed in afternoons and watched his breathing as if men had put him there on purpose to learn counting. The spring that pretended whispered around the edges of the kingdom, and a raven came with a seal Catelyn recognized by the pressure of grief it made in her throat. Riverrun had fallen at last to men who wanted to own it and could only learn to if they killed the last men who remembered the right songs. Edmure had yielded and been yielded in marriage to the wrong woman twice and in prison to the wrong men 3 times. The Blackfish had gone swimming in a river without armor and without a prayer except the old one that says, "I am water too." Catelyn went to the Godswood and sat in the snow. She came back with a face. "We will make a place here for the bones the river cannot keep," she said. "We will write in the crypt, daughter and sister and mother and wife, and then we will add the words the songs forget. Woman who learned to be hard when mercy ran out." Jon nodded. "We will hold a bread day," he said. "We will feed everyone for a day, and no one will say who paid for the barley." That is how grief should be spent. In the summer that was only small, Jon took men north because the ravens had learned how to scream quieter, and that is always worse. He had dragonglass and oil and men who had learned how to close ranks in wind that tried to open their mouths like oysters. Mormont had fewer men than he had had and more boys, and so many fires their shadows looked like an army. They went out together into trees that had taught men how to be stern and ran into things that had learned to be patient. They found a place where the snow remembered too much blood and a circle of stones that did not look like any hand had placed them. They found dead men who kept getting up until John taught the men to burn first and count later. They found a woman whose eyes looked like rain on iron and who spoke a language both older and younger than their own. She looked at John as if he had walked into the wrong room and as if the wrong room might learn to accept him. "You carry a smell," she said in the common tongue, rough and homemade. "Crow and wolf and something else." "We carry dragonglass," John said. "It makes a smell like dust burned under the sun. I am used to it." "Not that," she said. "Something like the cold when it has been asked to do a trick. This is a place where men once came to ask for tricks. They got them. It is hard to stop asking once you have learned it works sometimes. We came to burn things that do not like being burned," John said. "You will burn the world," she said coolly. "If you keep trying to make it less complicated by making some of it gone. But you will get your trick. You always do, men like you." "Men like me?" John asked. She studied him as if measuring his appetite and his hands both. "Men who believe it is possible to make bread out of stone. Sometimes it is. Most days it is not. Go home. Make soup." He went home, and he made soup with Lewin and with Wool the steward who had learned to look at carrots as if they were spears, and with the new cook who had 5 sons and had learned to turn grief into salt. He sent Moore to the wall and told Mormont that he would come again because he could not stop doing the thing that was hardest. Mormont sent back a strip of bearskin with a rough knot in it that meant, "You are a fool I can use." The years were short and long both. Joffrey died with a purple smile in a city that had pretended to be safe. Sansa's name murmured across ravens' backs and then settled somewhere nobody could get hands on it. Tyrion's name did the same, and men like their fathers wondered how luck could be so ugly and so tidy at once. A different boy wore a crown and a different mother wore a smile. The South continued to eat itself in pretty bites. Stannis made it uglier and better in 2 strokes and wrote Jon as little as he could get away with. The wall held, then buckled, then held again, and each time it took men Jon had learned to know by their coughs. Ramsay sent one letter that began "bastard" and ended in a mess of boasts and insults he had written as if he had been speaking to himself in a mirror and had gotten excited. Jon read it once and used it to light a fire nobody else wanted to do. He kept the warmth and gave the letter to the soup pot. Arya came back like a thought you had been trying not to have. It was spring pretending again, that little real one after the big winter. She walked into the yard with a face that made men turn their heads and then turn them away because looking too long at some kinds of truth makes your eyes water. Ghost lifted his head and then lay it down again with a long breath that meant, "At last." Jon wrapped her in both arms and then held her away and studied her like a thing he wished to buy and cherish and repair. "I can be anyone," she said, not smiling. "I only want you," Jon said. "I can be me," she said, reluctant and hopeful both, like a child asked to stand still and praised when she did not wobble. "I do not always like her." "Neither do I," Jon said, which is perhaps the best thing you can say to someone the world keeps asking to be other than they are. "That is not what we count." She walked Winterfell as if she owned it and as if she were visiting an old neighbor at the same time. She went to the forge and made the smith watch her while she made a blade better than the one he could have made for her, then laughed and apologized and gave it to him to fix what she had done wrong. She went to the weirwood and would not let anyone follow. She came back with red on her hands and did not cry. She went to Bran's rooms and kissed his brow and told him very seriously to stop flying in high winds because the air was full of knives even when you did not see them. She danced one night alone in the yard with a real sword, and the watchmen leaned on their spears and forgot to think of it as a woman. She left again with no hard words and no soft ones and a promise to try to come back once more before the world learned to be hot forever. Jon gave her nothing but dried meat and a square of good cloth. She would steal anything else she needed better than he could give it. Sansa wrote once at last in a hand that had learned how to say otherwise. "I am safe" is a word that can be written without lying if you understand what it does not mean. She asked after Bran and Rickon and after which girls in the kitchens had married and whether the wolf pit still held water in spring. She asked nothing about her own future. John wrote back as if she had asked and told her that if a man tried to buy her, he would find the coin rotted, and if a man tried to sell her, he would find the market burned. He told her he would bring her home if the world needed burning to do it. He did not send it, because sometimes you keep a letter instead of sending it so that the promise can be there when the other person needs it, fuller than it would have been if it had already been spent. When summer came real at last, men did not believe it. They stood in fields listening to water make friendly noises and thought it a trick. John did not tell them otherwise. He ate onions that tasted of something besides resentment. He stood in the shade of the heart tree and watched the red leaves whisper about rain. He watched boys make mud of themselves at the pond and girls teach them the real uses of mud. He made his hand do nothing one afternoon and rediscovered how difficult that is. He was standing by the wall near the ash tree when Caitlin came to him with a bundle that had once been blue silk in a southern summer. She had white at her temples the wind could not blow back. She had learned how to put down grief and pick it up again later like a bucket. She put the bundle on the table between them and unfolded it. Ned's bones looked like honest wood. They came up the King's Road like thieves, she said. But the men carrying them were so proud that it was more like a procession. I wanted to knock them down and weep into the dust. Instead, I walked beside them with my hands folded and told myself I was a lady. You were something better, John said. She smiled like a cut healed badly, and it was beautiful nonetheless. We will put him where he belongs, your father. He belonged in this earth even when he did not know how to make peace with it. They took him down with torches in their fists that made them look like raiders in the dark of their own house. They put him beside the men who had taught him how to sit and how to speak and how to be wrong and how to die. They did not speak because all the words had been used. John put a hand on the stone his father's name would go into and felt the chill of it. He found it fitting. Some men warm halls. Some men are the hall. After they came up, Rickon threw himself on a bench and went to sleep sideways with Shaggy Dog lying across his feet as if keeping him from being stolen. Bran closed his eyes for a long time and then opened them and said, "He is where he should be. He says there is no pain where he is. He says there is weight and he prefers it." John swallowed and nodded and went into the yard and hit a post with his sword until his shoulders felt like sacks of potatoes. Ghost sat with him under the ash until the light went and the bats woke up. When he could not stand any longer, he went to bed and slept and did not dream at all, which is sometimes the kind of thing dreams can do. In high summer, with barley in the fields showing men how to be yellow without shame, a southern party arrived with banners tied tight to keep the wind from making them into lies. The men wore Reach colors and Lannister gold so new it made men squint. Their leader was a lordling with onions of his own, painted on a shield, a fossaway with a jaw too eager to prove itself. He stood in the yard with the look of a person who had been told how the north was going to smell and had decided to like it anyway. "I bear a message from the king," he said with a care most men did not bring with them north of the neck. "The boy Tommen has a crown and a mother who thinks it suits him. He writes to reaffirm Lord Stark's place as the king's loyal warden if Lord Stark will bend the knee and bring him bread in winter. He writes to say that traitors are punished, and that he is not his brother." He swallowed and added, much lower, "He writes to say that he hopes you will accept his apology for your father. He says he was too young to do anything. He says he is still too young, and he is trying anyway." John studied him for a long moment. The man flushed and did not drop his eyes. "You have courage," John said, and meant it. "That is misused in the South but honored here. Eat and sleep and ride back with my answer. If your king is still trying when it snows again, he will have my letter to keep him warm." He wrote the letter with Luwin's neatness and his own stubborn hand. He wrote, "The North kneels to men who keep faith. I have bent my knee often this winter to men with less right than your boy. I will not call a lie a law. The man who killed my father wears gold on his hand and in his hair. You cannot ask me to pretend I do not see it. Feed your poor. Keep your word. Watch your mother. When the North has a choice again, it will remember." He sealed it with his direwolf and a wax that looked like dried blood and gave it to the fossaway with a skin of beer and a day's bread. The man took both with gratitude and left with his head not high and not low, which is perhaps how men should leave Winterfell when they have come with bad news and left with worse. The summer did what summers do. It distracted men from their vows. When the leaves began to think of changing again, Jon went to the rookery and put his hand on the rail where men leaned when they wanted to see a little further than their words could reach. He had not meant to put weight on it. It took him anyway. Luwin coughed politely and said, "You will break your mother's heart if you get yourself killed by a piece of old wood. That is a sentence any maester should only have to say once." "I am trying to learn to let some things be unsaid," Jon said. "It is harder than all the rest." "It is," Luwin said. "I am old enough to say this and be forgiven if I am sentimental. You have learned much in a short time. You have not learned that you cannot fix a thing with your face. Sometimes you must turn your back to it and pretend it will fix itself to save the piece of you that knows better." "What should I turn my back on?" Jon asked without sarcasm. Luwin tipped his head toward the west where the Dreadfort sat like a tooth grown in crooked. "You cannot hunt a ghost forever. You have men who will chase Ramsay until their children are old enough to hold spears. Give them a task that will make them too tired to hate him enough to die for it." Jon groaned, a small, honest sound. "You are right. I hate you for it." "That is the proper reaction," Luwin said warmly. He set men to the road then instead of the knife. He had them lay stone where men had always told one another to step around. He had them lift bridges that had learned to rot in the middle. He ordered granges dug into the south face of little hills so that if winter came quick again, it would find the north with its cheeks full. It gave the angry something useful to do. It gave boys a reason to come home after proving themselves. It gave old men a platform to sit on and talk as if they were still kings. He went once more to the wall when white began to appear in enough men's beards to make them uneasy. He found Mormont thinner and easier to laugh, which is another way of saying the man had learned that laughter is not a betrayal. He found Samwell Tarly with a book in his hand and a woman behind him with a baby at her breast and no apology in either pair of eyes. He found dragonglass in use and stories about steel that could leave a mark. He found a boy with skin darker than any Northman Jon had met holding a spear like a question and asking it honestly of men who still learned to answer. He met Melisandre there again, the woman in red who had shown him how to make light where there was none and how to feed gods without letting them eat you. She looked at Jon with her private fire burning behind her eyes and shook her head once, small as if this time they were speaking of the weather, and said, "He will try to use you like a sword." "Stannis?" Jon asked. "Everyone," she said. "Men who love you, men who want to break you, men who have never learned another way to hold a thing that is useful. Remember, you are a hand, not a blade. Hands hold, blades go where they are pointed. That is a difference that will save the North or not. I am a bad prophet about the things that matter." "I am no sword," Jon said stubbornly. "I am soup." She blinked, and then she laughed, a sound like bells in a city that had earned them. "Good," she said. "Soup feeds men. Keep feeding them. I will try to keep the world from going black while you do it." He believed her, and he did not, and it did not matter. He went back to Winterfell with Ghost running on ahead like a boy after a bee and found the yard full of carts with their axles high and children inside the carts with their ankles higher. He found Bran sitting with old Nan's grandniece and teaching her to make a bird come to her hand with nothing but patience and the way she looked at it. He found Rickon in a tree shouting that he was king of the apples and if anyone wanted to argue they had to climb. He found Arya's ring back in his box with a new scratch in it and no note except a smear of something that might have been tea. He found Catelyn standing in the great hall with her hand on the high seat as if to keep it from rising up and leaving. "The North breathes," she said, and it was not praise and not complaint. "It does," Jon said. "It would breathe for as long as men set tables and built barns and paid for bread they did not eat themselves. It would breathe for as long as letters did not always say what they meant and men learned to read them anyway. It would breathe for as long as wolves taught children how to run between legs without getting kicked and how to sit at doorways and let warmth in when warmth asked polite. It would breathe for as long as spring and winter took turns and did not forget how to exchange the room without breaking the door. The one thing John did that no one expected was simple. He endured. He did not make a throne out of grief. He did not make a song out of victories. He did not build a monument to his father where men could freeze to death admiring it. He wrote letters. He counted barley. He put a hand on boys' shoulders and taught them to hold a plow until the furrow respected them. He cut off a thief's fingers once and took no pleasure in it and then fed the man anyway. He brought a wildling child into the kitchens and put a spoon in his hand and then later a broom and later still a knife and later still a wife. He said no to men who wanted glory and yes to men who wanted breakfast. When the ravens came with news that Stannis had died not in glory but in effort the way men of that kind prefer, Jon stood in the yard and put his hand on the warm stone and kept the shape of his face. He went to the godswood and put his hand on the cold bark and kept the shape of his vows. He told himself that kings and crows and wolves are all tools the North uses in turn, and that the North is not a song a man sings. It is a breath a man keeps. He believed himself half and then completely the next morning when the sun came up indifferent and the kitchen caught fire and men put it out and then ate. If there is a story about him that men tell to boys who think heroes are the point, it is a dull story and a true one. It is about a man who did not sit when he was tired because the old man beside him could not stand to be the only one standing. It is about a man who took the soup to the sick when the sick would not come to the hall and then stood in the door and made jokes until their wives were laughing at him and they had to laugh too or be thought humorless. It is about a man who learned how to sign his name slowly so that men could watch the letters and learn to make their own. It is about a man who made a place on the high table for a child who had not been born strong and said nothing about it so no one else did either. It is about the way wolves lie beside fires and dream of running when there is nothing left to chase, and the way men do the same. Years later, when the winter that followed the real winter was only a story men told to make summer food taste better, a girl with a scar on her cheek and eyes like old wood came to Winterfell with a child on her hip and a man behind her who knew how to keep his own counsel. She came in under the arch with no horns blowing and no banners raised and no song sung but the one in her own throat. And the boy with her had hair like black straw and a laugh like bells. Rickon ran down the steps and picked the child up by his middle and spun him until the boy shrieked and everything in the yard forgot to pretend to be serious. Jon came down the stairs at the same moment as if the house had decided to give him a gift. He stopped and his face did an old thing first, crumpling, and then a new thing, smoothing into something quiet and splendid. "Cousin," Sansa said, voice strong. "Sister," Jon said, voice low. They held each other a long moment that would have embarrassed other people already crying if other people had not been them. Arya came out of nowhere and was somehow both in the hug and outside of it with a grin like a blade, and Bran sat in his chair with his eyes half closed and the corner of his mouth turned up in a way that meant he was keeping something to himself. Catelyn watched from the high seat with a hand to her mouth and a look in her eyes that made men who had thought they had seen all of her see that they had not. The boy wriggled loose of Rickon's pin and went straight to Ghost with the solemnity children reserve for saints and animals. Ghost sniffed his hand and then licked his ear and lay down so the child could crawl onto his back without anyone laughing. He had a bit of red thread tied to his wrist. Jon did not ask why, he knew already. Summer is when you count your dead by how many faces you can remember clearly without wanting to touch them. Winter is when you count your living by how many you can touch. In the years that followed the war in the snow, the North learned to count well in both ways. Men told stories about Ramsay that made boys afraid to go out at night and about Wyman Manderley that made boys afraid to come into halls, and those stories served. Men told stories about Roose Bolton that made women look at the men they lay with and ask whether their eyes were that pale, and those stories served too. Men told stories about Stannis that made law seem like a thing that could be done without love, and that served as well. They told stories about Jon that were quieter. They told how he had stood with his boots off on the flagstones one day in winter to feel the cold in the stone, and then told the masons to lay 2 more courses because the frost found you easier where there was not enough weight. They told how he had taken a whip from a man in the yard who had hit a boy for dropping a mug and then given the boy a different job because some boys will always drop mugs and there is no sense in making it a sin. They told how he had gone to the wall in weather that killed birds out of the air and come back with a man who would have died and a woman who knew 3 sorts of herbs nobody else knew. They told how he had stood beside a fire after a battle and washed a dead man's hands himself. They told how he had written a letter to a lord who hated him and put in it a joke that was kind enough the man had to laugh when he read it. Alone. When he died, and men do, even Starks, even wolves. It is the only vow the old gods keep. He did not die with a crown on or a knife in his back or a song on his lips. He died in summer of an old cough when the barley was green enough to smell like bread already and the children were allowed to swim at midday. He died with his hand on Ghost's neck and Ghost's paw on his boot and a boy on the step playing at swords with a stick and making the sound boys make when they think victory is a noise. He died with a letter half written on his table about salt allowances for White Harbor and a different letter half written in a box to a woman in the Vale he had never stopped thinking of as his sister. He died with his head tilted as if he were listening to something in the next room. They put him down in the crypt beside the man who had taught him to hold silence like a tool and to spend it when it would buy the most. They wrote under his name, he kept faith. It was not enough and it was everything.